Welcome, and thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar entitled Cloudbound, a gateway to unparalleled flexibility and reliability. My name is Caroline Gabriel. I'm a research director at Analysys Mason, a consultancy and research company based in London, but with a global footprint. We specialise entirely in technology and commercial strategies for telecoms, media and tech. And we have a division called Northern Sky Research, which specialises in satellite and space and is probably familiar to many of you. So I head up all our research programmes that relate to fixed and mobile telecom networks and cloud infrastructure. And of course, I'm increasingly focused on a research agenda that reflects the convergence of networks and cloud and the increasing interaction between satellite and terrestrial networks and services. So thank you so much for joining us today for this new webinar in the GSOA webinar series. And today we're addressing the critical issues associated with cloudification and virtualization. This webinar is presented today in association with ST Engineering iDirect. ST Engineering iDirect is at the forefront of satellite communication technology, providing innovative solutions that enhance the efficiency, reliability and profitability of satellite networks. Their advanced software and hardware products empower satellite operators, service providers and broadcasters to optimize network performance, significantly reduce operational cost, and navigate the complexities of regulatory compliance. And you'll hear more about that later from their representative on our panel, Bert. So just I'd like to share a few thoughts to set the scene before I introduce our panelists and what I know will be a lively debate. As I mentioned, I lead Analysys Mason's work on convergence of cloud and networks, and I work closely with my colleagues at Northern Sky Research on the impact of cloud on satellite platforms and markets. NSR tracks this impact in great detail, and it's forecasting that the virtualization of the ground segment will enable a wide range of significant new cloud-based efficiencies, but also new revenue streams. So the forecast on the left comes from their cloud satellite report, and it shows satellite cloud data traffic and service revenue worldwide from the decade 23 to 33. And you can see the revenues are growing at a CAGR of almost 20%, reaching a cumulative total of almost $46 billion across the value chain. So a lot to play for, but of course there are challenges. And there's a complex set of decision factors that companies need to make as they embark on the cloud journey, whether they're vendors, service providers, operators, or cloud companies. We'll hear a lot more about these issues, of course, from the panel, but the graphic on the right summarizes the key decisions that, according to the ecosystem surveys that we carry out regularly, are most critical to commercial success. So from top, of course, price, integration of AI into the platform to increase efficiencies, creating applications that leverage both satellite and edge compute, implementing multi-cloud environments where that's appropriate, forging the optimal partnerships to maximize results, and for many of our respondents, that is the biggest success factor of all. Assessing all the potential storage options and what's most efficient and cost effective. And of course, critical to any cloud journey in any industry, the right approach to security and data privacy. But enough from me. And now I'm delighted to introduce our panelists for today. These span much of the ecosystem, cloud, technology, services and operations. So we can see they'll introduce themselves in a little more detail, but we're delighted to welcome Paul Mattia from Amazon Web Services, Bert van der Linden from ST Engineering iDirect, Will Mudge from Speedcast, and Javier Trujillo from SCS. So I'd now like to ask each of our panelists, please, to spend a few minutes introducing yourselves further and answering a couple of questions, and then we'll move to an open debate. We'll keep it free-flowing, so panelists, while I'll pick on one of you to lead on each topic, I hope you'll all feel free to add your comments wherever you wish. And audience, do remember to enter your questions in that Q&A box, and we'll address them during the discussion or towards the end. So if I can go to each panelist, please say a few words about your organisation and its role in that journey to virtualisation. And also, if you can, please briefly share one key benefit, one significant milestone, and one key challenge of your cloud journey. I think that will set the scene nicely, and I'm sure we'll come back to many of these for further discussion later on. So Paul, can we start with you?
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Many of you have already heard of Amazon Web Services. It's the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud offering, with over 200 fully featured services from data centers globally, with millions and millions of customers around the globe, included some of the fastest growing startups, largest enterprises, and even some of the largest governments and government agencies are using AWS to lower costs and become more agile, also and innovate faster. And so when we really look at what is the benefit of the cloud, not just specifically talking about AWS, but cloud in general. And one of the largest benefits we see right away, if you look at a white paper that was just recently released by IDC, it says 51% reduction in operations cost. And so that really goes to speak to how do you become more efficient? How are you using those valuable funds to support your company? Right. Probably one of the best quotes that I love, what Jeff Bezos said, which was concentrate on what makes your beer taste better. Right. And so what he really means there is use the cloud for everything that's not making your beer taste better. So if you're a SATCOM operator, or if you're a hardware producer or software producer, concentrate on those aspects. Let the cloud be what you build upon so that you can focus on those. So that would be the thing that I would really like to leave you with. Now, one of the largest challenges that we see out there from a global cloud operator is really making sure that we're able to support our customers as they scale. And that means opening more and more regions globally. You might have just heard that we've announced 3 regions globally that we've opened up. We are also continuing to expand our cloud as we support growing our cloud business, not only in the US through our secret and TS clouds for the US Gov. So that's our biggest challenge, is making sure that we continue to grow with our customers at the rate that we're seeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And yes, we may come back to that beer saying it's a good one. Can I move on to Bert, please?
Hi, Caroline, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be on the panel here. So looking forward for the interactive discussions. iDirect, ST Engineering iDirect, we are vendor provider of SATCOM platforms and solutions for ground segment and remote modem terminals. Our position and in virtualization is about how do we transition from the classic way deploying appliances on, I would call it dedicated hardware, to move to common off-the-shelf environment. So ground segment is going through a cloud transition for various functions throughout the data path, as well on the management and control functions. So virtualization and containerization of network and baseband functions are actually front and center to realize cloud native deployment for both the ground and the remote. And the ability to use, as Paul mentioned, hyperscalers in the region, common off-the-shelf equipment, on-premise, combine that both. It brings us kind of a fully software programmable environment that scales from low size to a whole large capacity size, high density appliances combined with software only to be able to deploy at the right TCO per scale. So within iDirect, I'm leading the cloudification and digitalization strategy, mainly for the ground segment, with support for the remote. A key benefit of that journey is what we see. Our customers know us for years as having a flexible platform. We want to continue improving flexibility both in deployment, but also flexibility on the way we want to monetize, or the way our customers can benefit of other monetization models once we combine cloud offering with the capability of our platform. Milestone reached, given, so our current deployments, the ones we deploy today, all make use of our last generation common off-the-shelf infrastructure for both the control as packet processing, So that's already virtualized, running in operations at scale today with customers, and we are improving that. So parallel to the current deployments, we are active in proof of concepts where the complete data path, both in network processing as the baseband processing functions, deploy in cloud providers, cloud service providers, hyperscalers, as well as on-premises COTS. What is challenging at the moment for us is our customers are going through a transition. So there's the learning curve of, leaving the model of dedicated appliances. A monolithic environment was, very well understood with the majority of our customers, bringing in cloud and more software-defined networks, requests from our customers, another way of operating the platform. That combined with new pricing models, tuning this with public cloud offering is a challenge and is a learning curve, both for, I would call it, our services teams as well as our customers. And we want to make sure that, with the fellows around the table here, we would like to succeed on that journey.
Thank you, Bert. That's great. I'm sure we will come back to that question of learning curves. Obviously, we see that everywhere as critical. But if I can move on, please, to Will for your opening remarks.
Hey, thanks, Caroline. So my name is Will Mudge. I'm run the Tech Ops group at SpeedCast. So we have employees in over 44 countries. We are a managed service provider. We leverage all types of communications: LEO, GEO, MEO, LTE, microwave, Wi-Fi. I'm sure we would try two strings and cans if we had a chance to do it, to bring more service to customers. But we tend to try to find the solutions that fit best for our customers and bring them, to Paul's point of what makes your beer taste better. That's what we try to find, the beer that suits your flavor. We've got over 19 teleports that we own. We operate in another 19 with another 45 POPs on top of that, and about 35 offices globally. So we're very large from what we do. It's a pretty exciting spot to be in from a managed services, because we have kind of all three sides of this cloudification journey. We have our journey on how do we bring our data from desktop IT and corporate management environments. We have the technology data with ST engineering, and how do we take those communication systems and work to get to the cloud on those. And we help our customers on their cloud journeys as they go through this. And oftentimes we're building from our experience and how we help them along those journeys. For a key benefit for us, I think it's been the availability regions. From a remote site communications perspective, as you can imagine, we're very spread out. Our customers are very spread out. We're literally on every continent. So being able to not have physical servers in a particular area, we can leverage somebody like AWS's servers in a region, or an availability cluster, as they call it. Really helps us to improve the customer experience, right? You're not in Australia having to use a server that's sitting back in Scotland on the other side of the world. So your experience is much better from that perspective. On a challenge front, the biggest challenge I think I've seen is when we go to customers and we try to help them on their cloud journey, there's so many options and so many cool things that you can do that it becomes overwhelming, right? It's really hard to pick how are you going to make your steps on your cloud journey, right? There's a lot of ways to make a beer taste better or find a better beer, but which one is the one you're going to start at with it, right? Maybe it's picking a server, right? And it's just taking a server from a physical device to one that's in the cloud. Maybe you're at your life cycle limit. And I think what I would encourage people to do is just maybe find one thing, right? Find one thing that is troubling you and take that first step, because it really is a journey. And as cliche as it may sound, you really do kind of have to pick one thing and start working for it, which leads to that milestone. For me, it's hard to pick a major milestone that we've been over that I would call significant. I think all of our steps are significant. Moving into availability clusters, moving into global availability clusters, leveraging Lambda, right? Moving databases to it. It's almost like iPhone, right? Like when iPhone came out, that was the major milestone, but then everybody gets a new one. And every time they're like, oh, this is great. I can never live without this feature. Oh, this is great. And every time you take that next step in cloud, you tend to see the same thing, I think. So maybe I'll stop there and let Javier have a shot.
Thanks. Well, we'll see if we get questions about the tin cans and string option. But yes, on to Javier.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. So on my side, I'm working in SES. As most of you maybe may know, SES is a multi-orbit satellite operator with assets over the MEO and the GEO arc, serving the whole world with a huge variety of satellite communications. The services that we offer, they go from the traditional DTH video broadcasting, and it moves to the last high throughput data link communications, covering all different type of markets, like the ground, the sea, or the air. And all of these services could not be provided without a global ground infrastructure. That is what allow us to control and feed these satellites so that we can actually then connect our customers to whatever they need to. My team, it is the digital ground development team, and it is mainly focused on defining and implementing SES strategy towards ground digital architectures. So we are looking into the digitalization of the model platforms, looking into the digitalization of the user terminals, then how we orchestrate and make the deployment of all of these services, and finally also even looking into the 5G ecosystem and how we can get into that game as well. So one key benefit that I see from going digital is, I think it's been already said, but I cannot only more than emphasizes, is the flexibility that this type of architectures will bring to us. We will be able to respond even quicker to new services and requests that we get, and at the same time we'll be able to optimize how we use the resources, the hardware resources that we have available, both on the site or on the cloud. For the biggest milestone, or a significant milestone that we are reaching within this team, is that we are defining the digital architecture that we want to pursue in SES. And within that, we have released an RFP for ground stations, for digital ground stations. And we are there trying to get the two main blocks that will enable us to actually go digital, which is on one side, the part that will be on the ground station, that is the digitizer and the channelizer. And then on the other side, linked with a data network, we will have the digital modem platform that will be containerized and will be built based on cloud network functions, and to use COTS hardware that you can easily find on the cloud. And for the challenges that I think we have ahead, I would say actually I see two main ones. So the first one, I would say, is standardization. I think it's key. I know we are already working towards that, but I think we need more of that to make sure that this is feasible system and solution. And the biggest one to me is the question that we have around the total cost of ownership. So it's good we have here the interested parties that I think we will need to get into further discussions to better understand exactly how the cloud providers, vendor providers, satellite network operators can all work together to create a safe ecosystem, profitable for all of us.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think we've already got some really interesting points that we can follow up on there. So thank you to everyone. We'll now move on to discuss some of the topics that we feel are sort of front of mind for the whole value chain. And just a reminder to the audience, do submit your questions in the Q&A box at any time you like, and we'll come to those as we can. But for now, as I said at the start, I'll sort of pick on somebody to lead on a topic, and then but everyone else, don't wait to be asked if you have further comments. Just join in. But I'd like to stay with Javier for now, if I may. And quite a general one, but an important one that follows on from what we've just been talking about, which is about the drivers for cloudification, virtualization. In your opinion, what are the most important? I mean, for instance, do they relate to efficiency, to agility, to quality of service, to new revenue streams? Which is the primary driver in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think I already gave some hints on my answer before. Yes. that I see, but I believe that the most important driver is in this cloudification and virtualization is the commercial agility that we will be able to reach with this solution. And then on the second place, I would position the efficiency and the cost. So for example, a few weeks ago, I was working on a project where we had to ship some equipment to a gateway in a country with had difficult customs. So it took a while to move the hardware out of the customs and make it work at the gateway. And with a virtual modem platform solution, all of this burden would not exist, and it would be solved on a much quicker manner. And I think another situation that we will benefit from having a digital architecture, I think it was already highlighted for some of my colleagues here, is the cruise traffic and the seasonality of this traffic, right? So for half of the year, we have our cruise customers that are roaming around the Mediterranean, and then they move the other half of the year to be more around the Caribbean. So having a certain infrastructure for this type of services and us being able to reuse it, it would be a solution that actually can help us to reduce the cost of our total system.
And also improve the service for your customers as well, I guess, a more responsive service. Yes, absolutely. Any other thoughts on drivers beyond what we talked? Yes, Bert.
Fully aligned with Javier. I mean, exactly, flexibility, scale, time to market, time to your revenue. I would even say on top of that, you could provide higher, reliability by, for instance, having backup systems standby in an Amazon region, or you can balance over from one data center to the other. Once you have this common orchestratable infrastructure, I think that's another add-on that I would add as complement to what you mentioned, Javier.
I would also, if I could jump in as well, I would also add, outside of cost and efficiency, what we're starting to see in the cloud business is data sovereignty is very important to our customers in some cases. They want to keep their data within their physical geographical boundaries, and having as many regions as we happen to have, that enables those countries that require data sovereignty for our customers to meet that data sovereignty requirement.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of these points as we go through, but I'd like to drill down a bit more on the challenges. Again, as with the drivers, all of you mentioned ones that are particularly front of mind for you or your organisation at the start, but perhaps we can drill down a little further as to what are the biggest challenges for the whole ecosystem and the whole sort of transition towards these cloud platforms. Will, can I begin with you about what you see as the really important challenges, or the ones that, if they're not addressed, we're not going to move far along this journey?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Carolyn. So I think it depends on the scope, right? Like I said at the beginning, cloud can be extremely overwhelming with all of the really neat features that it offers and the cool things that you can do with it. When you talk about cloud in general, the biggest challenge is how you look at the money. Right, CapEx versus OpEx is what it really turns into. But it's interesting when you look at the numbers at the beginning versus as you're running through with them, because when you switch over to that OpEx model, you gain so much of the flexibility. And I think a lot of the panelists talked about that in the drivers. Moving availability zones or increasing the scale of your service for it, or the fact that you don't have to manage a physical appliance, but you can still maintain that data sovereignty even in these times of cybersecurity challenges where everyone's really looking at it. So if you want to talk about challenges at a high level, I think it's literally just doing the economics to begin with. And again, for us, the way these steps happened was we started to have servers that were out of support or end of life, or we've outgrown them. And we said, do we spend the CapEx on buying new servers to have these in-house, or do we spend the OpEx and we move these to the cloud now? And oftentimes that's the catalyst for that decision. I think the conversation here, though, is a bit more centered around, the digitalization of the satellite environment, and that has its own set of challenges, right? As we look at the modems themselves and how we communicate from a remote site back to a teleport, the challenge really becomes latency. as funny as that sounds, right? Because we deal with geostationary latency, or we deal with MEO latency, or so on, right? Latency is part of what we do. But after you convert the signal from a teleport antenna and an RF signal, you have to get it into some of this baseband equipment pretty quickly, right? There's really not a lot of room to backhaul that data to a cloud-based data center before you can actually start processing it. So when you look at taking racks out of teleports, how you accommodate that latency increase in your baseband equipment, I think is probably the biggest challenge, as well as how do you get the data from the antenna to the cloud-based data center in a format that's functional. So one of the things we're doing now is we're converting RF to IP, right? And then you can take that IP and you can backhaul it a particular ways. And turns out you can actually do a pretty good amount with that and move some of these things away into other areas. So that's one example of where, to get to that cloud journey, you have to start taking those technological steps along it. Otherwise, you're always going to end up with equipment at a facility, which is not part of that cloud journey. And probably a good time to pause there before I get too far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, but no, but it's fascinating, and it rings a lot of bells with where I sort of started my career, which is more on the terrestrial mobile, and of course they're cloudifying as well, and the latencies may be different, but there's still this huge issue once you move to the environment. So so that's certainly resonating, I'm sure, with many of our listeners as well. Yes, anyone else like to weigh in on the really big challenges?
I personally think that the lack of standards is still killing us in the satellite world. You know, if we look at our brethren in the telecom world, they came together probably in the early 80s. You know, as a case example, I had my first cell phone was in Newport, Rhode Island. I couldn't roam too far beyond there without it costing a significant amount of money. Now, because of standardization, I can get off my plane, get off a plane in Doha, I can get off a plane in Tokyo, and I immediately have voice, video, data services. And it's all one package. I don't have to go to Docomo. I don't have to go to other providers just to get a SIM card. And so once again, that lack of standards has really held us back. We should be at this time able to go from one constellation to the other, working backwards from our customers, meaning that they get their capability, they can roam from one constellation to the other, complete what they need to do. And that, I think, would really enhance SATCOM as a whole and provide us a measure of growth that we're not seeing right now in the geo side of the world.
Yes, it's a really good point, and perhaps something I'd like to follow up with you now, Paul, which is about sort of collaboration, because for those of us who were there when they were doing those roaming standards, as you mentioned, they've been foundational to the mobile model, but they took so long, and so many companies had to be really motivated to do those difficult negotiations and have what we all take advantage of now. So I wonder, Paul, and others, of course, will have views, I'm sure, but how can players now in this sector collaborate to achieve maybe not just standards, but shared solutions that can take us forward more quickly?
Well, this might be a little bit controversial, but we've talked about this issue within SATCOM for decades, and we haven't been able to do anything. So now I think what we need to do is really what Will mentioned earlier, which is, okay, where can we meet? And where we can meet is at the IP level. There's standards built in there. So as we go past the proprietary waveforms, we can enable and encapsulate those waveforms into an IP, and that is where that standardization can take place. There's other groups that are working on something very similar, like the Wave Consortium, which SES is a member of as well. I believe Intelsat's a member of it. We're seeing that might show some promise to bypassing the fact that we couldn't, as a group, and still can't, get to standards.
Fully aligned with Paul. I think you just mentioned it, right? And picking in on what Will says on the RF part, I think through collaboration in standard bodies, the parties around the table here and the resulting intro programs, say for RF over IP. I'm glad you mentioned it, well, but the Diffie consortium is actually there to make sure there is an ecosystem, multi-vendor ecosystem. We are in there, have spearheaded the initial, I would call it, merge between the Vital 49 and other proprietary implementations, I would say. You mentioned it already, Paul, the roaming or even mobility. In SATCOM, mobility roaming might have another, I would call it definition, but exactly the 5G SATCOM convergence all the way from non-3GPP access, interworking functions, all the way to potentially the 3G, NTN release 19 is then at the end will solve it all. But in the meantime, of course, our customers like an SES, like a Speedcast have, I would call it our waveforms in operations. We cannot just, pull one plug. I think there, the initiatives driving the vendors like us to more orchestrated way of deploying those waveforms onto common infrastructure on-prem because of the type workload and the total cost of ownership. Still today, majority of the data path, I would say, still resides on-prem, but in a standardized, for instance, like the Wave consortium, we are part of the board members there. So trying to drive that so that our customers can benefit from it, and then having, I would call it, by the community supported orchestration environment through Kubernetes, either in a by the cloud provided, and managed Kubernetes solution, complementing with on-premises use cases. I think will benefit from, or our customers will benefit from that. I would call it unifying both orchestration as well as adopting standards along access and IP distribution, fully aligned.
So this that's really interesting. Thank you, Bert, and it highlights the fact that standards these days involve collaboration between many different ecosystems. Obviously, as you just mentioned, you're taking account of standards coming from the cloud world, the IT world. It's not just about satellites' own standards and their own roaming anymore, and that brings a lot of complexity, I guess, to the relationships, the collaborations that organisations have to get involved with. We've started to have some audience questions, which is great. So thank you for those and keep them coming. So I thought I might pause at this because one of the questions picks up something that you were just mentioning, Bert, which is about on-premise versus using remote servers and remote cloud services. And the questioner says, well, is it more cost effective to use on-premise? What are the cost implications? I think you were making a strong argument for that this is an on-prem world at the moment, but what's your thoughts on the cost of that? And perhaps Paul and others would like to join in as well.
Yeah, there's two reasons actually why I'm stating the data part, so the high throughput. Our customers know iDirect from broadband services, so wideband, high throughput type use cases. So similar to like a 5G, would call it data paths, to make that today economically viable, affordable, in combination with the technology, fast data path, as an example, DPDK, SRIOV. These are all mechanisms or methods to make sure that we as vendor can use common off the shelf in by the cloud and open source community supported way. We still see, like, with all respect to Amazon, that in region, so in the hyperscalers, some of that technology is still, we'll call it early days. Combine my statement on high throughputs with the need for, high capacity networks, low latency, as Will says. For today, if you would ask me what is your your advised topology would be like you have control NMS running in hyperscalers and do the data path on an on-premises infrastructure. On-premises infrastructure, then I'll leave it to Paul on how the offering looks like. Could be a managed offering, through outposts or equivalent, or a combination where our customers decide to, either CapEx or OpEx, common off-the-shelf hardware. But fact is that the nature of high throughput, the nature of, I think, the customers here around the table is about broadband services, and we don't see that today for for possible to make that commercial viable, if you would run everything in scalers, everything. I mean, the data path included. So, and I see various initiatives with Amazon, for instance, how they deploy equivalent type use cases in a 5G ecosystem. I think that's what the satellite vendor should adopt, because telco is there, in all honesty, a step ahead of us on making use of common off-the-shelf infrastructure in an on-premises world still offered by the cloud provider.
Yes.
Maybe just to add, Bert,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we are seeing that happen, right? OneWeb and Starlink will show us for sure that we're using these LTE or these 5G waveforms, right? And the sooner we can be willing to adopt change within our industry and start to move towards these commonality functions, I think the better off we're all going to be. Like you said, right? We need to find a way to move for some of it from on-prem to the cloud, right? There are benefits of both, right? From a timing perspective and the likes, but no matter what, we're going to have to adopt to new standards, right? It happens with cell phones, right? To Paul's point earlier about, landing in Dubai, right? It happens with cell phones all the time where they evolve these waveforms to go through with it. And I think we're seeing the same thing in our industry. It's just getting forced upon us in this verticalized fashion between, what Starlink is and what OneWeb is, and probably what Kuiper will be as we go through and start to get to those. So I think the sooner we can bring some more of our broadband communications into these more well-adopted standards, I think the better we will be. We got to be open to change.
Agreed.
Yeah, no, I agree, and we really need to be supportive with the 3GPP efforts, right, that are going into that direction to try to get the satellite community also on board. It is clear the effort was already done in 5G NTN, and the 6G seems to be also moving into that direction. So we should definitely support all of those activities.
Yeah. As we look at it now from our standpoint, right? When Bert brought it up, just because you can put something in the cloud doesn't mean at this point it's economically viable solution to be in the cloud. We hit on standards previously. We are where we are with standards. It's just a fact, but when we do see such game changers as Starlink, OneWeb, others that have created their entire ecosystem in the cloud and are pretty much software defined across the board, it shows us that it can be done. It shows us that there is a business case there that is completely supported. We look at the growth that you see within Starlink with its recent numbers that they've published on how many customers they have. Now, it did take them a while. The other thing that I would like to point out, though, is lots of people have hardware, physical hardware. And so you have to amortize that cost. And so if you have that physical hardware and you haven't amortized the cost, then the business case to move to the cloud will be difficult. And so it's not going to be a light switch, turn off, turn on, cloud availability is there, drop everything, let's move to the cloud. But it's going to take a lot of time, as I said, because your company invests in its infrastructure, it just can't drop its infrastructure. Although we do see 62% increase in productivity within IT when they move to the cloud, these efficiencies aren't immediately, this is something I want to get clear for those who are starting their cloud journey. These efficiencies don't happen overnight. A really good example I can give you is if you have your own data center and you shut half of it down and move half of it to the cloud, you're not going to see the numbers that I referenced earlier because you haven't completely shut down that data center. You're still paying people to be there. You're still paying for power. You're still paying for that infrastructure. And so we call it a cloud journey. It is truly a journey to get to those efficiencies.
Right.
And when we talk about cloud, we can also be mindful that it can also be a private cloud, right? Deployed at the edge, so on site, but on a private cloud owned by the satellite network operator. So for example, what we could reuse exactly the architecture that is being proposed for also in public cloud to reuse the same hardware for different vendors and not having to get different appliances for different vendors, but just having a common hardware on a gateway side that can be used for any vendor provider, let's say, and we can reuse that same hardware. So we avoid the additional costing coming from the specificities of each of the modem vendors here, for example, in this case.
That sort of relates to, I think, a question that we have from an audience member, perhaps you could comment on, who says they can certainly see that cloud services help with flexibility, to your earlier point, Javier, and scalability, but aren't you still stuck with very high CapEx for ground infrastructure? Is there a way of getting away from that or reducing that?
I think there is where we have to see what is the type of traffic that would accept to move more on an OpEx basis, trying to use the hardware that is actually available on the public cloud, and what is the type of traffic that actually really requires to have the hardware next to the gateway and cannot leverage all of these OpEx intensive, less CapEx expenses for those services that could be migrated to the cloud. But anyhow, even adopting this new architecture, as I was mentioning, I see a lot of common hardware between all the different solutions that we would need to provide. So instead of having to furnish a gateway with three different types of providers, you can only furnish your gateway with a common hardware for all of them to then use the capacity that you would be able to have in the gateway. So as I say at the very beginning, I think the total cost of ownership for sure is a challenge that we have ahead, and we need an open discussion between all the parties involved to better understand exactly how we can move this forward. But I see we can get some benefits out of this, definitely.
Great, thank you. And as Paul said, obviously, not all these benefits happen overnight. I guess each company has to think, well, what's the right balance of CapEx and OpEx for them, and how quickly they want to move, and so on. But I'd like to move on a little bit more to services now, if I may. I think we've talked a fair bit about the platform. And I'll stay with you, Javier, to start, if I may, which is really, what are your views on how the cloud enables new ways of delivering services, such as a service? Are there new deployment and monetization options that you see are really helped by moving to the digital platforms?
Yes, so I have to say for this one, I think already Paul and Will stole my thunder, but well, I would say that the cloud has opened the door to new services, of course, and the more common one that I would say that we see in many places is the ground as a service, where different customers can make use of the same infrastructure at a requested time. But this solution can be further extended, creating new revenue streams with a remote digital modem. So I think this is what Paul was mentioning before, this sovereignty of this modem, so that certain customers really want to preserve their software, hardware, equipment within certain premises. So these remote digital modems could be then connected to the digital ground stations that could be offered as a service. And this service would consist then on this ground station connected to the satellite on one side, and then to the other side, it would be connected via IP from the antenna to this digital modem platform at the place where the customer desires, and this can be miles of thousands of miles away in principle, right? So that the security of this equipment involved from the part of our customer is preserved as they like. So the main benefits of this, again, what I see is this amount flexibility that I think we still have to discover all the full potential that we can get out of this.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on service delivery? Will, is obviously you're in the services side of the ecosystem. I wonder if it's changing how you're sort of interacting with your customers.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It's fantastic, because we have to remember we're not the only ones that are on the cloud journey. There's a lot of other companies that are as well. And how we tie into those services has turned out to be really interesting. So like Javier said, this is a bit like a Lego block, right? You get a whole bunch of cool Lego blocks with cloud, and how you build them up into the service that works for you is really pretty interesting, and helping people be creative with how that works. But some examples that we've seen that have really made a difference for our customers are something as basic as Open Table, right? Where you can do a reservation at a restaurant. That's a cloud-based application, right? And now we're able to bring those cloud-based applications to our customers at the edge because we have a connection, whatever. That's pretty basic, right? But now take it a step further, where you have something like Cloudflare, where you have a cybersecurity as a service that's hosted on a cloud-based platform that we can tie into, so our customers' data can go through a cybersecurity service before touching anything else. That's pretty interesting, because it's another use of cloud where connectivity's enabled that cloud to happen, where they can get this new service because they're on this particular cloud journey. Then you can take it a step further into how do you bring cloud into your environment. And we use one of AWS's functions called Lambda. Try not to get too technical with it, but it's a pretty interesting piece of software where what happens is you can write a piece of software, you can send it to the cloud understands how to function that piece of software through a quick loop, send it back, and do your whatever your software was processing, so we can use it, at the edge even, right? So we have a device at the edge we call Sigma, and it uses a Lambda function for many of its features, where it will send a request to the cloud will process the algorithm, and then it'll send information back to that edge piece, so that you're not doing your compute necessarily at the edge. You can do it back on the shore side, but you're not sending a ton of data, nor are you keeping a machine open and active. Like somebody said Kubernetes earlier, right? That's a machine that you keep active to run these software loops. It costs a lot of money to keep that active. But if you use a Lambda, you can just use it every time you call that function, and they charge you a small amount every time you call that function, compared to keeping a box up. So it allows you to scale. So if I only call that function 100 times this month because I don't need it that much, I don't pay that much. If I call it 1,000 times next month because I need it more, then I'll pay accordingly, but I don't have to worry about any of that with cloud. So it's really interesting to see in how we bring services to customers and the services that they get because of it, how the cloud journey has helped us go through it and progress. And it's literally something as basic as moving a server to something as complex as how do you process data on the edge, but do it in the cloud.
That's fascinating. And so you're seeing use cases, applications where virtualization is already demonstrating its benefits. This isn't all about investing now so that you can change your business in some years' time. No.
I mean, we've been using it for years through our journey, right? Many people do. I think you just don't recognize it as such. Like, oftentimes customer portals, because you can have those availability clusters in all the regions, then they're going to function better as long as they can sync between all of them. And again, that's part of that functionality, or cybersecurity, or so on. There's so many really cool things that you can do with it. That again, like your Lego set is gigantic, but you need to pick one, and you got to start with building your little Lego figure first before you can make the whole environment.
Absolutely. Great. I'm looking at the audience questions again, and audience members, this is almost your last chance to put your questions. So do put them in the Q&A box if there are things that you'd like to ask relating to any of the points that we've been discussing. Someone's asking specifically about government sector and what are the challenges and opportunities the SATCOM community in government cloud services. So I'm wondering if any of you have particular interest in that one. I'm sure you do, but particular sort of knowledge of how we might help that sector.
So we operate what we call two disparate clouds, right? So we have our commercial cloud, and then we have Gov Cloud, which is more for medical required, that has a higher required security element to it, but it's not classified. Then you can go to our two different classified clouds, and one is secret, one is top secret. And so where does satellite operators play in this? Well, our end customers are shared. So whether you're talking about SES Gov and their support of DoD, those DoD customers in some cases need to get that classified information back to that classified environment that they're operating in. SES provides that functionality through SES Gov to get back to that classified cloud. Now, when we get outside of that classified cloud, we've made announcements that we're building sovereign clouds, and we're over in Europe right now building a sovereign cloud, and there will probably be more following that. And so that is meeting the government's requirement that as they build up their own internal cloud offerings or internal capabilities. We've also had another one where Singapore, there's an article where Singapore has their own version of a sovereign cloud, and it's actually just what they've done is they've taken some capabilities that we offer, they've built it so that only Singaporeans can work on it, and that's their version of a Singapore cloud, right? And so that's how we're supporting, but it's that connectivity piece that, whether it's Speedcast and how they support different governments around the world, to include the DoD, MODs, SES, as I mentioned before, they're the enablers that without them, those end customers do not have that functionality.
It's very interesting. Great. We've talked a lot today about all the sort of different interactions with different technologies, different ecosystems, and so on as we move forward. Satellite no more than any other industry can live in a silo anymore. But I wonder, and I'm going to stick with you for a bit at first, Paul, if I may, but what more can the satellite business learn from other industries that perhaps have adopted cloud platforms a bit more quickly? I mean, telecoms arguably has been a little ahead, although I would say not terribly, but not super advanced. Is the satellite industry special, or can it learn a lot of lessons from other industries?
Right. So let me preface this with, I come from the satellite industry, whether it's my 22 years in the Marine Corps as a commanding officer of the satellite operations schoolhouse, or whether it was working as director of sales for North America broadband for Intelsat, or working at Chimeta, or eventually being here. I come from the industry. And so I say this, I know some people don't want to hear it. We are not special. We are not special. And especially as we look at, once we break things down to IP, we are just like everybody else. It's about moving ones and zeros. The part that makes us special is working in somewhat austere environments, but I think that's part's about to change. I think that the geo operators really have to look at who their true customer base is going forward, especially with the advent of LEO and how that has taken hold. And so I go back to, we are not special. We need to learn. We need to learn from telco. We need to learn from streaming, for instance, how our customers are going to get their information. It's no longer a C-band that broadcasts a single channel across a continent. It's very specific streaming services that those individuals now want. And we as SATCOM have to adjust to that, just like the telco world did. They stream, each device is picking up its own stream.
Yeah, I would agree on that, Paul. So I think the bottom line is, as I think we started at the beginning of this conversation, it's all about standards, and I think telco standards is a perfect example of where we should evolve to. And indeed, from a control IP perspective, we're not different. We are a bit different on the wave forums and the spectral requirements out there. But that also, I think we have this under control today with our proprietary implementation, and the move towards NTN is of course out there. We need to adopt and going in that transition. But I think it's as I think, was it Will or Paul or even Javier mentioning it, we can't do the on-off transition, right? We need to go through that journey, and the telco ecosystem is an example where you have, you know, different parts of the ecosystem having its own, you know, segment of standardization, and some of those is really common, and I think we need to just reuse that, and others we have to, you know, participate in the standard bodies as we do. Diffie Consortium mentioned Wave. Why Wave? Because our RAN is different, radio access network is different than the terrestrial one, so some hardware, even if it's coming off the shelf, is not compatible, so that's where we like that initiative. And then the third one is actually how can we, you know, have both those networks through that transition working, you know, as a single platform, you know, nicely orchestrated together. I think that's important.
Indeed, yes. Great comments. Sadly, we're coming rather near the end of the hour. I think this is a topic we could talk about for many hours, but it's been an amazing discussion. I'd like to conclude, if I may, by just asking each panelist one last question. We've talked a lot about challenges and what needs to, what can move us forward on this journey. I think we've recognised throughout the discussion there's been enormous progress, and you know, we can get too focused on challenges and forget just how much work and collaboration and effort has gone into getting us where we are already. But of course, there are always new goals to chase. So if I could just ask, I'll ask each of you in turn, if I may, just really briefly, just name one thing that you believe would significantly lower the barriers that remain, accelerate the digitalization and cloudification. I know there isn't just one thing, but if you just had to pick one, I think that would be, it would give us a nice sense of what are perhaps the urgent requirements as we move to the next phase. I'll go in the order that we started, so I'll start with Paul, please.
Sure. Having a workforce that understands cloud and its capabilities.
Thank you. Bert?
I would say just start doing it with proof of concept, not a big bang, but throughout the ecosystem, start to deploy certain parts of the workflow in cloud, and let's work together, learn, standardize, and transition to a software-defined, I would call it, platform.
Perfect, thank you. Will?
Yeah, I would tend to be a bit more dramatic and say that I think we need it faster than the iterative part. I think Starlink is pushing us as OneWeb is pushing us, but the one thing would be if we can move all of the baseband equipment into the cloud, right? Not just some of it, but all of it into the cloud.
Great, thank you. And the last word goes to Javier.
Okay, so to me, I think it was mentioned already a few times. I think the standardization, the interface standardization, the protocols, I think they need more people working on them actively and the companies adopting it quickly to push for this architecture as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Great. Well, great answers. Different answers, but they will sort of relate to each other and also to the points of discussion that we've had today. So I'll certainly be watching with a lot of interest as we move forward again on this journey. But unfortunately for today, that brings us to the end of our discussion. As we said, if there are questions we didn't manage to answer, we will try to respond to those in writing. There will be, and answers can be posted next to the video on the GSOA website if they're relevant. And please do watch the recording of this and pass the link to your friends and colleagues, perhaps people who couldn't join today. And of course, you can also watch previous webinars. This is an ongoing series on the YouTube channel or on GSOA's website, which is gsoasatellite.com. So plenty more content to come. Obviously, we hope you'll join our next webinar in the series. But for today, it remains for me to say thank you so much to today's panelists, Paul, Bert, Will and Javier. You've given us some really fascinating insights, and I've certainly learned a lot. I'm sure that the whole audience has. So thank you for sharing your interesting views. Thank you, the audience, for being here and listening and for your questions, and enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you.